let's start with the first issue of financing of higher education. We all know that I'm talking here about the public higher education system. There are a lot of private institutions in the country, some of them doing very good work, others are fly-by-nights, but I focus on the public higher education system. Our government spending is only 0.75. We do spend enough money in terms of international norms on education. Secondly, the state contribution over the last 14 years or so, for which I could get the data, has actually declined from about half of the cost of university education to 40%. What has happened in South Africa, we call higher education a public good, but we in fact have privatized it. And that's where the tension comes in, and students obviously understand that. The great error at the moment, what has happened is when the government came under pressure in December of 2015, they gave in to the idea that student fees should be set centrally. Now that is unlawful. Every university in South Africa is set up by a law of parliament, and one of the autonomy aspects that is written into the law is that on questions of admission, obviously within the law, on questions of setting your class fees, that is the prerogative of each university council. Because, ladies and gentlemen, we are not all equal. So if you say everybody where you are today just at 8%, you reinforce the iniquities in the system. You don't solve the problem. What do we say about free education? Well, we all know there is no such thing. Free means somebody pays, but not you. The current suggestion by the minister that is being implemented right now is if the combined income of a certain home is 600,000 and below, you will then be subsidized for the increase of this year. You still pay your old fees, but the state will subsidize that portion. I will say a few things about this. The first question is, in a relatively poor country like ourselves, where should the state put its budget? If you want to create greater inequality in South Africa, the poorest place to spend that money is in higher education. What the Policy Institute in Stellenbosch has done is to calculate what they call the progressive or regressive impact of social spending on inequality in South Africa. And the reason is quite simple. If you've reached the stage where you can enter higher education, you already belong to a fairly elite group of people. You have probably gone to a fairly good school that asks you a lot of money. So what you actually do is you create an additional benefit for those who are already in a certain way privileged in society. But you can see the difference is if you look at the other kind of spending that our government does, and it's one of the successes of our democratic government is in fact to decrease the Gini coefficient significantly through progressive taxation and obviously social spending. Free education, and for that matter, I would personally think all education should be subject to very strict academic progression criteria. You cannot be funded if you fail. My second point is on institutional reshaping. This will be quite controversial, and I just want to say I speak here on behalf of absolutely no one. Please don't hold me to it. It's just a thought experiment if I look at the system. Firstly, ladies and gentlemen, there's a terrible, terrible mixed match between the realities of South Africa and the shape of our post-school education system. There are about 700,000 students in the 50 public colleges that we have. There's about 1 million students in the 26 public universities. But the participation rate in those universities are only 60% of those that pass matric. For the rest, 84%, we create inter alia that kind of space. It's completely skewed. So in simple language is, we've got far too many university spaces and far too few further education and training spaces. I'm a strong believer, I think naively so. I had 2 experiments and one failed completely, the other one worked quite well. One must not overestimate the possibility of public-private partnerships. But I would, for instance, think that if the government goes to 2 of our good listed companies that are in education and say to them, we will provide the building cost for an extra 50 colleges spread over the country in those places where access is the most needed, which will probably be some of our rural areas and our peri-urban areas where we put these up. But we will contract you to manage it for us. You will recruit the staff, you will run the finances, you will make it, until we get them to a very good sense of self-management, and then we hand over to the management of state employees. In that way, we get a very quick gain on the capital expenditure, but we also get a fairly firm hand on the management of those. It's very interesting what these colleges offer. I would thought they would offer vocational training that makes you ready to become an electrician or a person who understands how sewage work, which is important in South Africa, by the way. You see what's happening in some of our municipalities. No, if you look at their courses, they all give business courses. It must be a form of training that makes you immediately ready for employment, if not self-employment, then through others. When we come to the university system, yeah, it's controversial. I think we have too many. And they are trying to be all things to all people, and it's costing us tremendous lot of money, and it also have huge quality implications. Let me say what I would propose. That we segment our higher education in two different types of universities. And I deliberately named the first type, type A, because it might, in some people's mind, wrongly be the perception that this is a weaker kind of institution. Not at all. Type A universities are called teaching and learning universities. So what we have in South Africa, half of first degree enrollments leave the university with an academic record with some credits on them, but with no qualification. That's wrong. So what we should do is to take cognizance of the academic ill-preparedness of a great number of our students for higher education and acknowledge that it is the case. So what do? We say to them, and we rechange our finance system to say, your first degree is 4 years. You must know that. First degree is 4 years, and these universities are also able in the 5th year to add to those degrees an honors degree. We then do a significant investment in their infrastructure, specifically in ICT, so that we can get blended learning and forms of distant learning on the go. We make a huge investment in the teaching ability of that staff. And how do we determine which universities will be type A? I did a bit of looking at the figures, and it's not so difficult. There are 8 universities in South Africa whose contribution to research in South Africa is less than 1% of the total. So if we produce 100 units per year in all universities, 8 of our universities would produce less than 1 output unit, which is basically, we've got 1 university with 0. That's not necessarily a bad university. It's a teaching university. We can get about 9 to 10 universities in South Africa, type A, well-funded, excellent in teaching, in fact, help us to become better teachers, and that will save us a lot of pain in the system. Type B universities, they are more research-orientated, and here I know this is very controversial, but I believe even here we have too many universities who try to do everything for everybody. Colleagues, we can simply not sustain under our current staff, infrastructure and financial systems that all universities, even in type B, would present everything that we are doing at the moment. We have to make clear that Mandarin or French or Latin will be taught at 2 or 3 universities and nowhere else. Guys, the days are over that universities can fund everything by themselves. I can see no reason why Netcare cannot build a medical school inside Stellenbosch University. I see no reason why big construction companies cannot come together and say, we will set up an engineering faculty. The fees must fall's insistence on quality education is a very important and a very good one. But we must just understand, universities apart from the Catholic Church, is probably one of the oldest institutions in Western society. Universities have long-standing systems, and it's quite simple. Firstly, you make sure you appoint the right staff with the right qualifications. I've been in the privileged position, because of the help of Stellenbosch University main campus, to make a number of new appointments in USB. The difference they make is astounding, because in each case, we choose the best. Secondly is the most rigorous form of quality assurance in a university has been established through rigorous peer review exercises. I also think this might be controversial, but I've thought about it a long time. You cannot teach in a primary school or in a high school unless you've got a teaching qualification. I think it's time that universities put their foot down and say, within 3 years of your appointment, you shall pass a national certificate in curriculum design, assessment, and teaching to ensure the quality of the work that we do. What does decolonization of knowledge ask us? They say Western forms of knowledge have become the only epistemic standard for knowledge. And then two things happen. I make it simple. Two things happen. Number one is other forms of knowledge constructed in other epistemic ways is therefore not seen as true knowledge. Secondly, even if you would construct knowledge in a Western way, because you do not belong to the center of that system, its exclusionary power would mean that your voice is not heard. So decolonized education asks for two things. We want to hear more perspectives outside of the normal Eurocentric education. And the second is we want to include knowledges in our curriculum that are not necessarily exponents of scientific knowledge as we define it in the West. So let me say what are our options in short. First is we can retain the status quo. We cannot call ourselves a truly African business school if our case studies are drawn from the website of Harvard Business School. There are very interesting case studies in South Africa. The second option is where you say, well, we don't want to see Europe, Eurocentric, we want to replace it with Afrocentric knowledge. Now, I have sympathy for that. The problem is simple, I hope you can follow my argument. The construction of Afrocentric knowledge never starts de novo or from a tabula rasa. The moment you try to construct so-called Afrocentric knowledge, the categories that you use in that construction is already embedded in your own education. And what is that education? Eurocentric. Now, third would be the kind of thing that I would stand for is let us supplement our Euro tradition, let us decenter our Euro tradition with strong research that are contextual and provide fantastic inputs into the rest of the world. Our HIV research is an example of that. The last option is the most difficult one. Can we replace science as we have come to know it since the modern period with different epistemic forms of knowledge? The answer to that is, sorry, it is difficult. It's yes and no. So some sciences require high empirical exactitude. So if you say, must we make room for different knowledge forms? The answer is absolutely yes. But does that mean that all utterances and expressions are seen as knowledge? The answer is no. Because even in poetry you get people who get the Nobel Prize and people like myself who are just, singing in the shower. Let me end. The first scenario is that we get progressive disintegration of our higher education system, as had been the case up to now. Why will that probably happen? The government will be slow and inadequate in its response. Continued disruptions might happen. What will then happen over time is your best staff will leave. Our international students are hugely concerned, because last year many of them could not graduate at huge cost. They came here, they had to go home and come back. And obviously rich people like you will send your children to elsewhere. The second scenario is that we return to normality. The state respond quick by June. That response is adequate. Then we can return to a sense of normality. The third scenario, which is my personal view, which I think will happen, is that we will have pockets of dysfunctionality amidst some normality. So if you ask me, I would pray and hope for scenario 2 by July, when we get the government response. If you ask me what I think will happen, I think we will still stay within scenario 3 until at least after June or August this year. Thank you very much. Appreciate that.